platform for the round of experts from Romania, India, New Zealand, Australia, Switzerland, and our distinguished UN diplomats, let's watch the introduction video of panel session 1.
SDGs Conference 2023, Transforming Our World, September 20th, 2023. The SDGs Conference 2023 focuses on 3 major areas. Panel 1 aims to raise awareness in building a new momentum towards the 2030 deadline for the SDGs, considering the social, economic, and political commitments by governments by 2030. The Sustainable Development Goals are a universal call to action to end poverty, protect the planet, and improve the lives of people worldwide. Today, progress is being made in many countries, but only 15% of the SDGs are on track. Panelists will share possible responses to accelerate the timely and gender-sensitive implementation of the goals and deliver the SDGs by 2030. Therefore, Panel 1 will address the following themes: progress of the SDGs halfway through the 2030 deadline and emerging challenges, strengthening institutions and political commitment to achieve the SDGs, partnerships for the goals to break through a sustainable, peaceful future, the new agenda for peace, a pact for a transitioning era of geopolitical complexities. At the end of the SDGs conference, the JWF and its global partners will propose a framework for action for the next 7 years to improve local and national policies and practices based on the assessment of the progress made towards the achievement of the SDGs. We believe that providing innovative solutions, developing effective strategies, and offering policy recommendations will advance sustainable peace and development worldwide. The Journalists and Writers Foundation and its global partners remain committed to transforming our world through partnerships for the goals.
So the panel session 1 will be moderated by Associate Professor Silvia Osman at the National University of Political Studies and Public Administration, Department of Sociology in Romania. Author of more than 20 books, Silvia Osman has also published many articles on literature, discourse and multicultural dialogue, paradigm shift in education, and mindset within the framework of multimodal approaches to communication. Silvia, the floor is yours.
It is a pleasure to be here and hear what everybody has to say. We are a community, a global community, and the feeling I have is that it is probably enough to build a momentum. It is said that it takes a whole village to raise a child. So to raise an agenda and have it done by 2030, it would take a global community, a global village. We started yesterday with a round table talking about values, about human values, timeless, frameless human values would take us closer to human rights and to have more strength in not only creatively rethinking frames, but also think about the benefit of others. Thank you everyone for your life of service in implementing the goals. As I was thinking about a framework in which to include the wonderful speakers I have on panel 1 today, I started with wondering, what is a momentum? What do we need to build? Because the SDG goals are very clear-cut forward, everybody understands them. And of course, they should be like a roadmap, Mr. Ambassador. But what is a momentum? And I researched the dictionary and listened to what it has to say. Actually, a momentum is a property of a moving body that determines the length of the time required to bring it to rest under the action of a constant force. So yes, ladies and gentlemen, your actions are the constant force that applied can bring about the momentum. And yes, ladies and gentlemen, we won't rest until all those things that we all are fighting for, being human rights or human values to surface to our global world, would be in place. And yes, we are the moving body that make the momentum happen. And I am sure that you will agree with me to just roll up our sleeves and contribute to it, to building it. Yesterday, a very nice lady panelist at my table today told me that love is a verb, when I was insisting that it is a deep human value, essential to all our acts. So yes, if loving is a verb and love is a verb, then building means using the bricks of our own imagination, the building blocks of the momentum we need to bring about. And yes, let's roll up our sleeves and put our values to work while we build a community, a global community of action, and establish a roadmap. I'm very happy to be here and to introduce to you my first speaker today, His Excellency Mr. Stan Smith, Ambassador, Permanent Mission of Bahamas to the United Nations, who has, before his latest appointment, has served as personal assistant to Prime Minister Barry Gladstone Christie from 2018 to 2021. He was also Ambassador at Large between 2015 and 2017, head of legal division in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, as well as a contributor to its United Nations team on human rights. During that time, he also provided general foreign policy development support. Before his diplomatic career, Ambassador Smith practiced law in Barbados between 2005 and 2015. Earning a bachelor degree from St. Mary's University in Canada, he is also a graduate of the University in the West Indies Law School. What a pleasure to have here next to me, Mr. Ambassador, His Excellency, Mr. Stan O. Smith. Please, you can have the floor.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, honored guests, and members of the Journalists and Writers Foundation with the John Jay College of Criminal Justice. I mark this a privilege and an honor, and thank the organizers for this opportunity to participate in this discussion on building a new momentum towards the 2030 deadline for the SDGs, under the general theme, Transforming Our World. I also take this opportunity to acknowledge the integral role that journalists and writers play in shaping public opinion and informing the world in an increasingly physically dangerous environment against journalists and writers. And I express my thanks for your commitment to covering the challenges and opportunities faced in seeking to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. In January of this year, Foreign Policy published an article by Adam Tooze about the development profile of the Bahamas. The point of the article was that the climate crisis has eliminated the resilience in the Bahamas' economic model, tourism, financial services, and the second home market. And we need innovations that can sustain socioeconomic health against the volatility of the climate change landscape. The annual cost of natural disasters to SIDS is $1 trillion. This is a perennial SIDS challenge against achieving the SDGs. Now, do we attempt to activate the politically unused regulations and policy reliefs of the international financial institutions? Do we continue to universalize the policies and individualize the innovations dynamics? Or should we universalize the innovations dynamics and individualize the policies? Do we address the SDGs goal by goal? Or do we invest in moonshot initiatives that create network effects, more readily activating otherwise untapped capacities useful to and meeting the target of immediate community needs? The development community must address these philosophical mechanics about how to arrive at sustainable, resilient prosperity that eliminates genies and bottles from the search for and the discovery of sustainable innovations. A question we ask 7 years since the adoption of the SDGs tells us this: our politics, our finance experts, and our country interests are not connected to one another on common global challenges. Not connected by language, professional language that is, not connected by experience, not connected by vision. Small island developing states are consumed by managing governance and lack implementation capacity. International financial institutions have nothing to lose that would incentivize commitment to reform, and multilateral agencies lack scale. The Bahamas has made a privet from this vacuum. But the reality is this: 1% of CARICOM state budgets are invested in science and technology. The global north produces 60% of scientific literature, and 10 countries, not including the Bahamas, have absorbed 65% of World Bank loans. The government is now investing in understanding the science and technology needed to benefit from the untapped ocean value in the archipelago. The government has recently created a carbon market registry and will next offer a $500 million bond against seagrass sequestration capacity in the country's 100,000 square miles of blue economy potential. Now, not long ago, I was waiting in a line for a diplomat of more than 4 decades of accomplishment to sign my copy of his book. He asked one of my CARICOM colleagues, who was at the front of the book signing line, how does such a small country win a Nobel Prize? In that moment, I realized that a country with a $500 billion GDP only wanted a Nobel Prize and hasn't gotten one. And a country, small as it was, with a Nobel Prize, cannot get a $500 billion GDP. We have each been winning alone, and we have each been structurally failing alone in the deficiencies of our resilience models. In one instance, I became aware of a small state that received development assistance on 40 projects. I recall the professional admiring the young geniuses whom he said worked in his office. He said they were all geniuses. But he said, Stan, every single project of the 40 we got funding for have failed. We simply don't have the capacity to deliver the projects. Here's an essential question a SIDS expert asked a donor country partner. This happened in a room like this, in a formal setting, with a microphone. Are SIDS states equipped for partnership engagement? And the reply by the professional was, country assistance is likely needed at earlier phases of initiatives. And this was beautifully diplomatic to say that too often the proposals for the initiatives come to us under-conceptualized, and they will fail. Multilateralism has overemphasized bilateral solutions built on funding ourselves out of challenges. But we should be mindful that financing goals should not consume development ambitions into a solitary track. Funding is not the end of the development initiative. It is preparation for at least 7 critical processes after first effectively, thoroughly conceptualizing the initiative. And how we sustain viable need is in fact a task beyond project management, and we will develop that. We have unfortunately under-conceptualized the network benefits of framework thinking for the maximization of delivery outcomes. The proposition here for me is that we should create a sustainability resilience framework. I would like to show a diagram of a rudimentary outline of such a framework. I would like to disseminate this for consideration by the audience. At the crux of this diagram is this. In all of the discussions I've had on this subject, the question was, how do you integrate the private sector and financing into the UN framework? We're all motivated by profit, and profit is very important. And I would like to recommend that there is a way to get this done by adding finance experts with the right regulations and policies that will guide the modalities for how they support conceptualizing, executing, monitoring, and delivering the outcomes. This is a development that I would like to elaborate on in a question and answer period if we have the opportunity. My submission is that we should physically integrate the private sector into the UN. The framework has to be enabling to deal with the acceleration of negative development disruptions and the need of states to recover quickly and cost effectively. This framework I'm proposing should give partnerships the implementation capacity for dealing with managing the conceptualization process, executing the initiative, monitoring the phases of the processes, and managing the delivery outcomes. This framework should also widen our capability to realize the innovation creation dynamics in individual and across initiatives. And I would stop here to say that the foreign policy article, the challenge was, what can small states do to actually genuinely, indigenously innovate to create resilience in your economic models? And my submission is that it is not to be done bilaterally or by the ingenuity of one state, but by a framework of multilateralism that has cooperation, use the resources of many states and the ideas of many states to find the innovations and the solutions for resilience of individual states. It is also that this diagram should help us to, framework should help us to realize the thematics that are essential in the viable initiatives and essential for delivery outcomes, and to realize otherwise unexplored partnerships and investment pipelines. And later, if I have the opportunity, I will tell you and elaborate on the fact that inside the United Nations, in that multilateralism, in this powerful convening space, everything we do is bilateral. And we are yet to find, until now, I think, a formula that would actually integrate states, no matter the capacity they have or the skill they have, but based on the common purpose of a systems-based thinking. Now, I have adopted these categories: thematics, innovation, creation dynamics. I've adopted these from a colleague, the president of the Caribbean Development Bank, who has used these in our discussions on the issue of how we create resilience in our economies. But the genesis of this framework for me came in the fusion of two assignments I undertook over the course of this year. One in chairing a meeting and dealing with the transformation of moving beyond GDP, and another involving a discussion amongst colleagues on the fragility, the vulnerability of our states, dealing with the cycles of governance and how those changes don't allow us to focus on sustained development. I think small states like the Bahamas can get ahead of the innovation challenge posed in the foreign policy piece with the benefit of policy tools like the Bridgetown Initiative, which addresses debt challenges by small states, and the Multidimensional Vulnerability Index, which deals with access to credit. These things being applied to a resilience framework as I have sketched it here. And I would welcome the opportunity to elaborate on it if we have the chance for question and discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Stan. Our next panelist is Mr. George Abualzulof, if I had pronounced it correctly. Thank you very much. Or Abualzulof. Exactly. I concentrated, therefore my pronunciation skills are better. So, Senior Human Rights Advisor by the United Nations Development Coordination Office in the United States, with a contribution called The Latest Progress of the Sustainable Development Goals halfway through the 2030 deadline. George Abualzulof is a human rights defender with around 30 years of field-focused experience in a variety of human rights areas, including conflict, developmental, and post-conflict situations. Before joining the UN, DCO as its Chief of Universal Values Section. Mr. Abualzulof served as the Senior Human Rights Advisor to the United Nations Resident Coordinator Office and the United Nations Country Team in Jamaica, MCO since 2018, and the representative of the Office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights in Yemen from 2013 to 2016. In 2016, he was appointed as the director of the Qatar-based UN Human Rights Training and Documentation Center for Southwest Asia and the Arab region. Mr. Abualzulof worked with UNICEF MENA for 5 years as a Justice for Children specialist and as the General Director of Defense for Children International, the Palestine section for 10 years. He holds a master's degree in children's rights from University of Freiburg, an Institute of Children's Rights in Sion, Switzerland, and a BA degree in social work and psychology from Bethlehem, Palestine. If I might say, ahla wa sahla, fik tsharaffna. So welcome, and please, you have the floor. If you would like to please take the other microphone so it is, closer to you, so we don't move. Keep it for the panelists. This will allow me to introduce everybody. Thank you very much.
I'm so happy to be with you today, and really on behalf of the UN Development Coordination Office, I would like to thank the Journalists and Writers Foundation for their kind invitation and organizing this really very important SDG conference in the margins of the UN General Assembly 78. I would like also to welcome your global partners and delegations, journalists, human rights defenders, civil society organizations, academics, who are coming from, as you said, around 15 countries. This is really reflects the interest and commitment by civil society towards the SDGs. Also, adding to this, our virtual participants who are joining from many countries around the globe. So greetings to you all from the UN Development Coordination Office. As majority of you might know, the DCO, UN Development Coordination Office, oversees the whole UN development system with around 132 United Nations country teams in the field and 5 regional offices. This happened after the UN development system reform. As you all know, in 2015, the world leaders made a historic global promise to secure the human rights and well-being of everyone on a healthy, prosperous planet when they agreed on the 2030 agenda. This promise, which we called the agenda, is now in its halfway to its 2030 deadline, is now in deep danger. Instead of progressing towards the 2030 goals, development progress is now reversing under the combined impacts of climate disasters, conflicts, economic downturn, and remaining COVID-19 effects, as many of you mentioned in your introductory remarks. Tens of millions have fallen into poverty. Over 110 million people are forcibly displaced. Inequalities have worsened, strikingly also for women and girls. More people are being denied health care and education. The climate crisis is causing destruction on lives and livelihoods. This collective failure, and I am not creating this as my new definition, it's also mentioned by the UN Secretary General in his SDG report. This collective failure will impact every country and all of us. But of course, the burden falls most heavily on developing countries and the world's poorest and most vulnerable people. Thus, we have to take an urgent action now. And the SDG Summit is a vital opportunity to take action and break through to a better world. The SDG Summit is also a moment to recommit to a vision of the future that ensures no one is left behind and fulfillment of human rights for all without any kind of discrimination. To be able to face these challenges, fundamental shifts in commitments, solidarity, financing, and action must put us back on track to end poverty and inequalities, realize just societies, and reset a balanced relationship with our natural world. The world leaders who are gathering in New York these days must choose to fulfill the promise or the promises they have made and to respect their obligations and commitments they made since 2015. And we have to say that there is no place to failure. As I was asked in this panel to try to summarize, because actually it's not easy to summarize the key issues and the key challenges, but I'll try my best. And what are some of the proposed recommendations? And this is all stipulated clearly in the Sustainable Development Goals Report 2023, which stipulates that the SDGs are in peril. The world has entered an age of polycrisis, and hard-earned SDG progress is threatened by the climate crisis, conflict, gloomy economic outlook, and lingering COVID-19 effects. It sounds the alarm and urgently calls for redoubled efforts to get the goals back on track. Sounding the alarm, the world faces big messes across the goals by 2030 in the absence of a significant acceleration. And here, several of you in your introductory remarks mentioned that in the preliminary assessment of the 140 targets for which data is available, they're still facing a challenge on data issues, but shows that 12% are on track out of the 140. More than half, although showing some progress, are moderately or severely off track. And some 30% have either seen no movement or regressed below the 2015 baseline. The number of people living in extreme poverty rose for the first time in a generation with the onset of COVID-19. For the first time in 3 decades, progress in key areas such as childhood vaccination and income inequality between countries has reversed. It presents trends persist by 2030. A staggering 575 million people will remain trapped in extreme poverty, and 84 million children will be out of school. It will take almost or nearly 300 years to close the gender gaps in legal protection and eliminate discriminatory laws and end child marriage. We are at war with ourselves and the nature. The climate crisis is worsening as greenhouse gas emissions continue to rise. Global temperature is likely to reach the critical 1.5 degrees, tipping point above the pre-industrial level by 2035. Heat waves, droughts, flooding, and wildfires have become far too frequent. Rising sea levels are already threatening hundreds of millions of people in the coastal communities. Developing countries and the world's poorest are the most vulnerable and bearing the brunt. The report also shows that while the lack of SDG progress is universal, it is often the world's poorest and most vulnerable people who are bearing the brunt of the consequences of this. Developing countries are also disproportionately affected, all while their voices is not fairly represented in the global governance architecture, and some of you talked also about the reform of the UN system and the Security Council, etc. And in international financial institutions as well. And this must change now, and there's no time or there's no opportunity for the leisure of time. We must make the next 7 years count. Achieving the SDGs depends on it. We can still turn things around. Since 2015, there has been some improvements in key areas, including poverty reduction, child mortality, electricity access, and the battle against certain diseases. We must say that if strong political will is matched with technologies and resources and knowledge which is now available, we can enable a breakthrough for a better future. The report inspires hope by showcasing the progress the world has made and the potential for further advancements. We must enact a rescue plan for people and the planet. We must be ambitious to match the scope of challenges ahead. We must make a fundamental shifts in commitments, solidarity, financing, and actions are needed to put us back on track. The political declaration adopted by the High-Level Political Forum on Sustainable Development, which I think it was 2 days ago, ensures a common understanding among member states to advance the transformative actions leading up to the SDG targets by 2030. The political declaration represents the beginning of a new phase, so we cannot consider it alone as enough, but it is a beginning of a new phase of accelerated implementation of the 2030 agenda, which will need, of course, to be complemented by continuous high-level political guidance and national and local actions. This is an opportunity for all of us, citizens, journalists, civil society organizations, the private sector, to advocate for the urgency, ambition, and action to realize the goals. The 2030 Agenda remains the clearest blueprint of humanity's highest aspirations. The SDGs are a blueprint for a more resilient, peaceful, and inclusive future. When historians write about the 21st century, they will judge the leaders and policymakers by whether they have succeeded in transforming this blueprint into reality. It is now up to all of us to ensure that the global goals are achieved in full and on time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your contribution, George Abualzulof. So Patricia Garcia, AO Partnership Development Manager, Institute for Economics and Peace, comes from Australia. She spent and had worked for more than 20 years in some of the world's most dangerous conflict areas, including Afghanistan, Bosnia, Kosovo, Rwanda, Sudan, South Sudan, and the Thai-Burma border. She was appointed an officer of the Order of Australia in 2016 and was a finalist in the 2016 NSW Australian of the Year Awards for her contribution and services to the international humanitarian aid and development sector over the past 2 decades. Patricia Garcia was a Human Rights Research Fellow at the University of Sydney Centre for Peace and Conflict Studies from 2000 up to 2002 and designed the Human Rights course for the Masters of Peace and Conflict Studies at CPACS. Ms. Garcia is also a honorary associate at the University of Sydney, where she is a sessional lecturer in peace and human rights with a passion to promote and advance the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals agenda. She's also an amazing woman who I had the chance to talk to yesterday, and I can assure you that the former presentation doesn't even come close to who Patricia Garcia is. So please, Patricia, the floor is yours.
It's an honor and a pleasure to be here with you today, and I'd like to thank the Journalists and Writers Foundation for the opportunity to present here at this panel on the SDG Summit. Just like to say that tomorrow is the International Day of Peace, and just to reflect on this important day tomorrow, we heard at the initial reception on Monday a youth delegate, Oscar, asking all of us in the audience to not only talk but to also take action. And because tomorrow is International Day of Peace, and our presentation on today is very much going to be about peace, I'd like to call on all of you to take some action. Let's be part of the solution to this SDGs agenda, and to commit to a personal action and a collective action that can contribute to advancing the SDGs 2030 agenda. So I call on all of you to think about that for today and tomorrow as the International Day of Peace, as we mark International Day of Peace. And also to take the lead from our youth colleague, Oscar. Time is running out. Those of you who have been following the SDGs agenda, it was in 2015, 7 years ago, that all 193 countries formally adopted this SDGs, 17 SDGs with 169 targets to transform our world for a better future. And as our previous speakers have said, the SDGs has presented us with a roadmap of the 17 goals, with the signposts being these 169 targets. Having been a passionate advocate of the Sustainable Development Goals, we've seen that over these last 7 years, we have not performed well. In fact, many countries have actually, in many ways, deteriorated. And so there's a sense of urgency for us, with time running out, with only now at the midpoint of 7 years, that we have to accelerate our efforts. And I think it's really important now that we look at how we can be able to find innovative ways and ways to collaborate to be able to address the enormous global challenges that we are facing today. I don't think with the time that I have, I want to focus so much on all these global challenges that we're all aware of, whether it's the climate crisis, whether it's the economic inequality, the growing societal polarization, and also the geopolitical tensions and conflicts that we are all facing. We need to look at the SDGs as not only a roadmap, but also a vision for hope for a world that we can build a peaceful, equal and sustainable future for all. The SDGs for me represents 5 Ps. It's about people first, the planet, peace, prosperity and partnership. And with those 5, it's so important to understand that these are universal goals. They belong to all of us. And because of that, it is a shared responsibility that we must take to be able to advance these goals and to be able to achieve all 17 goals. The nature of these goals, when they were first developed, was based on consultations all around the world. And the key, I think, importance about these goals is that they provide a common language for all of us to be able to address these global challenges in a way that we have a common language to express how we can find the solutions, how we can take actions, and how we can collaborate. My role at the Institute for Economics and Peace is as a partnership development manager. So the word partnership is actually central to my work, working with the Institute for Economics and Peace. And I've been so privileged to be able to meet with many of the people we have here yesterday and at the beginning of our SDG Summit, to hear all the wonderful work that many of us are doing to be able to advance the SDGs, particularly with the goal, SDG 16, the goal of peace, building peaceful, inclusive societies with access to justice for all, and also strong, transparent, accountable institutions at all levels. This is such an important goal because it's the goal that is cross-cutting across all 17. Many of you might know that the whole approach of the SDGs has been based on what we call systems thinking, where we try to shift people's thinking from not looking at a singular cause-effect relationship of how we deal with issues, but looking at issues as being a system. And because of this, with the system, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And this systems thinking is what also informs Institute for Economics and Peace in the way in which we measure and analyse peace and the economic cost of violence. I'd like to just start with just some explanations that with the SDGs, many of you might also understand that there have been some constraints in being able to advance these SDGs, and one of them has been the lack of financing. And we heard earlier a speaker about the importance about needing to have innovative financing mechanisms, whether it's increasing our overseas development assistance, whether it's looking at building public-private partnerships, but we need to look at different financing mechanisms to support the SDGs. The other area is often the lack of measurement. How can we measure progress on how we are going with the 17 goals? And this is where Institute for Economics and Peace, as an independent global think tank that measures and analyses peace and the economic cost of violence, provides metrics to measure peacefulness in 163 countries. And also, we hope through our measurements of peace and analysis of peace, we can also provide a better understanding of the social, economic, cultural and political factors that drive peace. So just a little bit of an example of showing you how one of the examples of the tools that IEP has been able to develop is called the Positive Peace Framework. As I mentioned earlier, the Institute for Economics and Peace was established in 2008, and we pioneered the empirical study of peace. In other words, with the organisation, we were able to measure and analyse peace. And the aim of IEP is to undertake a research to show how peace is a positive, tangible and achievable measure of human well-being and progress. So think of this concept of peace as something that is positive, tangible and achievable, and also a measure of human well-being and development. The Global Peace Index was our first report, and many of you might know this is the report that measures and analyses the absence of violence or the fear of violence in 163 countries. And this represents 99.7% of the world's population. So I'd like to just show you that how we rank the 163 countries is we use what we call 3 domains. These domains are international domestic conflict, safety and society, and militarization. For those of you who want to really look at understanding conflict, and particularly the drivers of conflict, and particularly now in the changing nature of where we see the world going in how we understand conflict, the Global Peace Index provides the evidence and data to show you the trends of where countries are going in the issues of conflict. This is a very quick picture of the world map to show you through the colours. The green is very good, high peacefulness of countries, and of course going to the red being the countries that are the least peaceful. And as you can see here, Russia is definitely the red colours, and also in some of the areas of the continent of Middle East and also in Africa. And in the 2023 GPI, we saw that 89 countries had improved, 84 countries had improved and 79 had deteriorated. The key highlights of this 2023 Global Peace Index showed that Iceland remains at the moment and has been for many years the most peaceful country in the world. We have Libya and Burundi, the largest improvements. Middle East and North Africa have improved in the last 3 years, and also Europe has remained the most peaceful region and recorded only slight improvement in the last year. Afghanistan remains the world's least peaceful nation and has also recorded just in this last year, many of you might know, since the Taliban takeover in August 2021, there had been some improvement only in this last year, but it still remains the least peaceful country in the world. You might be surprised that the Taliban actually criticized IEP because of that ranking this year. We got a strong criticism from the Taliban government. This is the 10 most peaceful countries. For many of you, you may not be surprised, but it's just good for those of you coming from the countries where you're coming to see what this year's top 10 countries being the most peaceful. And then also, now we have the 10 least peaceful countries. I'm going through this very quickly because I want to go to our positive peace framework. We've seen a decline in peacefulness over the last 13 of the last 15 years since IEP has been established. And obviously not very sobering news to be able to say that this deterioration has continued consecutively over these last 13 years, and unfortunately the scenario is not looking good also for the future. For those of you who are really interested in what are the measures we use to be able to measure the peacefulness of countries, you can see on the left-hand side, these are some of the 23 indicators that we use to be able to measure what we call the militarization, social security and safety, and the international and domestic conflict domains of each country. And this is how we score the country's level of peacefulness using these indicators that you see here on the left. Just in the last year, the total number of battle deaths, because there has been an increase in conflict deaths and battle deaths in this last year, were primarily in Europe, in Ethiopia and Ukraine, which I think would not surprise many of you. This is a very important slide I'd like to show you. As I mentioned to many of you, Institute for Economics and Peace also measures the economic cost of violence. And I'd like for people to think, when people are looking at conflict and they're looking at war, we're not only looking at the actual conflict of fighting and battles, military security. People have to look at conflict and war as also being what we call the military-industrial complex. It's the whole business of war. And IEP also measures the economic cost of the violence that the world spends each year. And this figure, 17.5 trillion, was how much the cost of violence was for this last 2022. It's a huge figure, and to just give you how much is being spent on the whole military-industrial complex makes you understand where most of this money is coming from. And many of you would be not surprised to know that most of this cost is coming from military expenditure. And where does military expenditure come from? Mostly governments. So who do we need to be talking about when we're talking about financing? And we need to be looking at why governments are spending so much money on military expenditure that is contributing to more violence in our society. That figure of 2,200 per person is the equivalent of that 17.5 trillion. And I just wanted to mention that 2,200 per person is what that cost of violence is. The equivalent of 2,200 per person is spent on violence. Many of you might know that that's even more than the per capita income of people in developing countries. And this is quite an important figure to be able to remember. And what we could do if we just took 10% of that, 1% of that 17.5 trillion, if we could use that money instead of spending it on violence, think of what we could do to make the world a better place and what we could do with spending that money on doing good things. So, positive peace. What IEP has been measuring has been on what we call the actual peace of the state of the world today. IEP calls that negative peace because it is looking at the broken bits in a society, the dysfunctional aspects, conflict, violence, fear of violence, are what we call the dysfunctional aspects of society. But we found that it's not enough to understand peace if you only look at the broken bits in a society. In other words, it's like looking at the human body. Yes, medical science and doctors have been able to discover wonderful ways to deal with our illnesses and diseases, but as you know, to making a healthy body, you also have to look at what makes a body healthy. And we also know that good exercise, regular diet makes for a healthy body. And this is what we call now positive peace. We not only look at what is broken, we also have to look at what are the positive elements. And IEP is using research of what comes up to be the most common characteristics in peaceful countries. What makes peaceful countries peaceful? And we came up with the what we call the set of 8 interrelated factors or pillars of positive peace. The negative peace is what you saw in this previous report, the Global Peace Index, measuring absence of violence or the fear of violence. But now we also need to look at what we call positive peace. And positive peace is defined as the attitudes, institutions, and structures that create and sustain peaceful societies. Look at it as 2 sides of a coin. You need 2 sides for the coin, and we need negative and positive peace to be able to address peace and to be able to contribute to building peace. These 8 pillars, as you can see here, are well-functioning government, equitable distribution of resources, free flow of information, good relations with neighbours, high level of human capital, acceptance of the rights of others, low level of corruption, and sound business environment. These 8, which are all interrelated, you can't work on them individually because they are all interrelated. Working together and putting the information together for these 8 pillars contributes to creating a peaceful society, a peaceful community. And we have been able to provide that evidence and data, which is so important in being able to advance the Sustainable Development Goals so that you can show how you can contribute to the Sustainable Development Goals by using this positive peace framework as what we call a monitoring tool or an advocacy tool. What are the benefits? Why would we have this, and why is it important to have a positive peace framework? Well, we found that through our research that the benefits of being able to use and contribute to positive peace leads to higher per capita income, stronger resilience with the communities, better environmental outcomes, higher measures of well-being, and better performance on the Sustainable Development Goals. So this positive framework can actually be a practical tool for you to use in your monitoring and advocacy for the Sustainable Development Goals. These are some of the informations that is contained in our report, which I brought just to show you. This is the Global Peace Index, and this is the Positive Peace Reports, in which this information I've just taken from. And I'd like to just say that all of IEP's reports and publications are available for free and downloadable on IEP's website, visionofhumanity.org. I wanted to just show this slide for those of us who are working on particularly Sustainable Development Goal 16. Many of those 8 pillars, particularly if you look at well-functioning government, free flow of information, equitable distribution of resources, acceptance of the rights of others, low level of corruption, and sound business environment, are actually correlated to the 12 targets of SDG 16. If you look closely at the 12 targets of SDG 16, there's a very strong alignment with the positive peace framework and the pillars. And what we've been able to show here is that you could also use the positive framework as a critique of the 17 goals to show where the goals are performing or not performing. One of the things that we've been able to show is that the issue of corruption, which you would think is a serious issue in where all of the challenges we're dealing with, is only mentioned as one target out of the whole 169 targets in the Sustainable Development Goal, which for us is quite surprising when you know the seriousness of corruption and the importance of how corruption can drive conflict and drive all sorts of tensions and also contribute to the crises and global crises that we're facing today. And yet it's only one target out of the 169, and it's in the goal 16. And so this is why, with IEP focusing also on low level of corruption as one of its key pillars, the data that you can use from our reports could contribute to how you could address this issue of corruption that is in an underlying goal, underlying target as part of the SDGs agenda. Another example is increasing lack of media freedoms around the world, which many of you, and yesterday we had quite a lot of discussion about that. And this is an important area. The lack of media freedoms is a huge issue. And again, it is one of the issues that is part of SDG 16. And this is why, with IEP, we measure the issues of free flow of information, how we need to have a society where there is free flow of information. And the lack of media freedoms that we're facing presents a challenge for us to see how we can be able to address that issue. And using the Positive Peace framework, we are able to provide evidence and data to support how we can be able to address this issue of lack of media freedoms. Many of you might know now, with the digitalization, the rise of what we call now misinformation, disinformation, it's presenting a huge challenge for the world now in being able to have access to freedom of information. These are some of the organizations that IEP partners with to be able to work on how we can contribute to building peace in the communities. And as you can see, the goal 17 for many of you, the goal of partnership, that's the goal that is the glue that actually links all the goals. And this is why goal 17, I just like to stress for many of us, is the actual goal that we must all be able to contribute to, because it is the glue that connects all of the goals together. And when we're talking about partnerships, we're talking about building collaborations, connecting with the country. These are the countries where we've been working, connecting with all the different countries, because the global challenges are beyond our national borders. And because they are global, and as I mentioned, the SDGs are universal, they belong to all of us. So there is a shared responsibility for us to be able to develop partnerships, collaborations, and particularly international solidarity on so many of the issues that we're dealing with, whether it's climate, whether it's economic inequality, whether it's forced displacement, refugees, mass migration, or whether it is governance issues, corruption issues. We need to work in partnership because, as all of you know, the diverse thinking leads to better solutions. And we need to work together in a way that we can show leadership, we can work with advocacy and influence, and also we connect with communities, people, communities and organisations to build cultures of learning. A very important part of the SDGs, and particularly coming to these sessions, and particularly with International Day of Peace, is that strong, I think, connection for all of us is the underlying principle that has been a strong principle for me in being able to be a strong advocate for Sustainable Development Goals, is that underlying the Sustainable Development Goals are human rights norms and principles, which all of you understand is what the Sustainable Development Goals are based on. They're based on really our human rights norms and principles. And the key one I would like to say is leave no one behind is a very, very important principle of the Sustainable Development Goals. So I'd like to add and end with important message that with that leave no one behind principle is a poem that comes from my country, from Aboriginal woman writer and poet Uduru Nunagal. She was the first actually Aboriginal writer and poet to have her poems published, and I'd just like to say that poem and present that poem to all of you. It's called All One Race. All one race, black tribe, yellow tribe, red, white or brown. From where the sun jumps up to where it goes down. Heirs and Pukasabs, demoiselles and scores, all our family, so why make wars? They're not interested in Brumby runs. We don't honker after midnight suns. I'm for all humankind, not colour jibes. I'm international, and never mind tribes. Black, white, brown, race, yellow race or red. From the torrid equator to the ice fields spread. Messieurs and seigneurs, hubras and fraus, all are family, so why family rows? We're not interested in their igloos. They're not mad about kangaroos. I'm international, never mind place. I'm for humanity, all one race. Thank you.
Thank you, Patricia. A wonderful poem, isn't it? Dr. Ranjana Kumari, Director for the Center for Social Research in India, is here with us, and she's as well the chairperson of Women Power Connect. Dr. Kumari has dedicated her life to empowering women across the South Asia region, and she's also a prolific writer of many well-known publications. She has served as the coordinator of the South Asia Network Against Trafficking in Persons and is a member of the Central Advisory Board on Preconception and Prenatal Diagnostic Test Act 2001, as well as the Central Advisory Committee for Prevention of Trafficking in Women and Children. Being an accomplished academician, Dr. Kumari has a number of publications to her credit. Dr. Ranjana Kumari combines the two roles of a woman activist and scholar with great felicity and panache. Having dedicated her life to significant social causes, Dr. Ranjana Kumari continues to impact the lives of many with her dedication and zeal. She has her master's and PhD in political science from Jawaharlal Nehru University. Dr. Kumari, the floor is yours.
Thank you for a very generous introduction. And also I want to express my thanks to JWF for giving me this opportunity, and in Dialogue India for facilitating this opportunity. So thank you for inviting me. Also for an issue which concerns us all, which I'm going to address at the moment. But before I say anything, it's a very happy day for Indian women. So I want to bring that message to you and share it with you. The happy day because there was a fight, a struggle. Women's lives are full of struggle. But this struggle was for getting women political power. And we have been of the belief that unless women are sitting at the table half and half, 50%, I don't think we would be at the moment really feeling bad, sad, and that's my second news that I'm going to share with you. So today, while I'm talking to you, Parliament of India and a bill that was being fought for to be passed by Parliament for 27 years is being passed because Prime Minister Modi proposed it, and 550 4 members, that is the whole house, barring just 2 members, they only opposed it and everybody else accepted. So today we have 33% seats reserved in India's parliament for women. So you can see, and I'm sure, this is going to make the whole difference. Now, that's where I want to bring in this whole gender disaggregated data and power of this data, or power of any data for that matter. I'm going to talk to you about that. But the sad news is that we have not been able to achieve even 1/5 of what we set out to achieve 7 years back. So what really went wrong? Pandemic? Yes. This was a big disruption. But responsibility of the states? No. I don't think we can blame everything that went wrong because of pandemic. It went wrong because most of the countries did not muster the political will and courage and put their resources in the place that they should have put for achieving the SDGs. So it's extremely important that we should look at what happens when we do have the correct, accurate, scientifically generated information and data. Now, why it is that when we talk about gender equality and when we talk about what we achieved, I think it's important to look at this data. It's not only that 70% of the countries don't know what is the status of women's gainful employment. They don't know, 70% countries. And then 40% countries are not aware of land rights or land ownership of women. I mean, I can go on and on talking to you about how many countries really actually reported when SDG data was collated together. Anyway, whatever the report came, it's important to pay attention to that how many areas progress has been too slow. At the current rate, what will happen to women? What data came to us, if we are analyzing that data, then we are looking at estimated 300 years to end child marriage. 300 years it will take before we will eliminate our children to get married and get into the kind of, hell that they are at the moment after child marriage. 286 years to close gap in legal protection and remove discriminatory laws. I mean, we can do that. Every country can set up a committee, a board like, some of us did in India, to review the laws from the gender lens and from gender perspective and just delete them. We don't need so many laws. A lot of, laws which were a kind of, we inherited because we have been 200 years British colony. We didn't need those laws. And then still we continued with them for the past 75 years since independence. So I think that's something is achievable, is doable, and we could do it. 140 years for women to be represented equally in position of powers and leadership. So at least India has made some step towards that. We are able to do that. And 47 years to achieve equal representation in parliament. So what is missing here? I think what is missing here is political will of the nations to progress and to get women equal opportunity. Now, when we have the data, when we know exactly what has gone, then we know where what is going wrong. And then we can really tailor-make the strategies to really reach out and to be able to change that situation. If we have that informed data with us. If we don't have, then this is all like, either we are ignoring it or we don't want to do it as nations, or we are not really moving into informed advocacy. Now, going back to this example of our struggle, we had to build a whole data set in the country since independence till now, where are women in terms of power and decision making? And when we presented that data that we started on the eve of independence, 75 years back, only 3% women. And today, after 75 years, only 14% women. So where are we in terms of women getting represented? How do you call it a democracy if women are not even sitting, equally to make all kinds of decisions? Are women only there to vote and to bring you to power? just like to cook and put the table, food on the table? Is the role of women that? Or is it more than that? If it is more than that, then look at this data and see what's going wrong where. So I think that's where it's extremely important to go for all kinds of... so there is a huge data gap at the moment, whether you look at the education. So what happened post-pandemic? So many girls have dropped out of school and started, especially for the lower income group communities, they started working with the mothers. And so many girl children are never sent back to school because they continued pushed into earning that income because survival of the family, they lost jobs, they did not have enough resources to survive. So many of our countries, the girl children are still in that position. And also to top it all, since there is an issue of security of those children in terms of physical security, in terms of sexual security, so what happens? They have been all pushed to child marriage. So data is escalating about child marriage. Dropout rate has gone up. Now we need to know this. We need to know how many percent. When we started working in districts which are gender critical districts in our country, Center for Social Research data said, that's my institution, we talked about it. Nobody was agreeing with this thing. They said, no, girls have dropped out. Yes, girls did not come to school, but they're all now back in the school. And we started looking at their rosters, and said that where is this one? Where is this girl? What is happening? So almost 20% girls have never gone back to school. It's a very high number for a country which has, decided to give right to education as constitutional guarantee. So that's one thing. When you have the data, you have informed policy. On the other side, you have informed advocacy. It's extremely important for all of us who are working in different kinds of fields, whether it is climate, whether it is peace. When we see this, that 17 trillion, whose money is this anyway? The governments are spending on all kinds of, war and arms and things like that. Who is giving this money? Who is making this hard work and paying taxes and all this money? So I think it's important to, if you have this data, then you can do more informed advocacy. And that is needed because we have to all go back after this SDG news, which is very shocking here, that we have not been able to achieve more than 15%, to go back and start working. So we need much more gender disaggregated data. The other thing is there is a power of data. If people know what's happening, then there is not only sensitization and advocacy that happens, but also that policy makers are helped to design correct policies. They're able to design correct intervention. And then, of course, impact assessment is extremely important. One UN initiative was to start gender budgeting in all our countries. I don't know how many countries really finally adopted it, but India did. And when we do gender budgeting, then every budget, every penny spent will have to be seen from the perspective of who it is benefiting finally. Is it benefiting the poor? Is it only poor men? Or is it also reaching out to the women? And how women are getting benefited. So that's extremely important, why we should have the gender disaggregated. So what is the problem? Why are we not able to get this gender disaggregated data? I think there are 4 or 5 issues here. Very important issue is that we do not have the kind of understanding, or you can say the index, or you can say scale on which we are able to collect that data. So a lot of our data collection machinery is not equipped with that. And just to give you one example, we started talking about women-headed households. Everybody in the government said, what do you mean by women-headed households, Our data doesn't show anywhere that women head households. It's only men. They are the farmers. Women are not the farmers. And effectively 70% agriculture is handled by women only. Whether men are working, gone out of their homes and working in different cities because of the migration and migrant labor, women get left behind with children to make all the decisions, whether it is agriculture, whether it is health, whether it is education. So who's heading that household? It's women. But it took years for us to convince our census data collection, which happens once in 10 years. And because of COVID disruption, we have not been able to do the data which we were supposed to collect in 21. So finally, this was accepted as an area where our enumerators will go and ask, not say who's head of the household, because women are used to saying, he's the head of the household. He's not here. He's in Bombay, he's in Kanpur or wherever in the country, but he's the head of the household. How many women really think, even if they are the main providers, even if they are the first providers in the house, they don't consider themselves as head of the household. So I think then women-headed households were included in our census as one of the categories for data enumeration. So that's something also is driven by cultural, social understanding of how we collect our data. Now, the other thing which is very important is resources. To get extensive data collection, you need resources. It's not possible. We are making a lot of conjectures. We are making a lot of observational calculations. And that's not something which is going to lead to the real good, solid understanding. Yeah, I understand. It's only 2 minutes for me. So I feel that, so that's very, very important to understand that that kind of a data collection is, so many things that are there where we need to invest in data infrastructure. So my call to action in 2 minutes is that let's invest in real, genuine data infrastructure. Because without that, it's only blind game, You're carrying your cards very close to your chest and you are throwing it blind. It may work, but it mostly will not work, let me tell you. And it is not working, and that is why only 15% in 7 years, and we are still not even 1/5 way. Now, standardization is extremely important because data needs to be comparable. A lot of data was sent when we have been collating reports in the country. They're not comparables. You can't compare, something like mango and, as you say, peaches or whatever. I mean, you have to have the similar kind of standard when you are looking at the data. And it has to be global. It has to be global so we get a good global picture of what is happening, because most of the low-income countries are suffering for these issues, and nothing much is moving because of resource crunch, debt crisis, war, economies have gone down after pandemic. So I think we need to really get into it and start getting the data. And also we have to take responsibility of capacity building of data collectors and enumerators. There is no way we can get right data unless they understand how to get. And of course, finally, the data dissemination. We have to have good forums, channels, lots of good research has been done, lots of good information has been generated, but a lot of people are ignorant about those facts and those kind of studies and researches. So I feel that it's important to conclude the urgency of increasing internationally comparable gender disaggregated data collection cannot be overstated. I want to again emphasize it. It's a call to action that demands the attention of commitment of governments, organizations, and individuals worldwide. By working together to close the data gap, we can take meaningful steps towards a more equitable and just world for genders. It's time to sound the alarm and take action. So I feel that's extremely important time. We are there. We have all the, and with AI now and the technology that we have in hand, there should not be any excuse for that. And the gender disaggregated data will tell you that we are sitting on climate negotiations. Women are missing, 1 or 2 in the corner of the table. Nobody wants to hear them. When we are discussing peace, how many women, we were just talking about that, how many women, and I'm sure in your presentation, are in peace negotiations, really? How many women? So we joke about it, and please all men in this room don't feel bad when I'm going to say that. Men create war and women suffer. But we don't have any way to play a role to stop that war. But we want to ultimately, like we got women reservation bill passed, we want to ultimately stop this war. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kumari, for your contribution. So I am now to introduce a journalist, a spokesperson, senior media advisor, UN Special Envoy for Syria from Switzerland, Ms. Jennifer von Fenton, who has been the spokesperson at the United Nations Office for the Special Envoy for Syria since May 2019. She attends the SDGs conference in her personal capacity. Previously, she worked for Al Jazeera in Doha and New York, and CNN in Atlanta, Jerusalem, London, and Abu Dhabi, holding senior positions, including an executive producer. Ms. Vaughan has also worked for the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs in Palestine and the UN Refugee Agency in New York. She held the Yale Poitier Fellow in Residence for the 2017-2018 academic year. She has won several major industry news awards, including multiple Peabody Awards. Welcome, Ms. Jennifer Von Fenton. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm very honored to share this stage with you, and I'm cognizant of time, so I will be brief.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
So, the Secretary General noted in his annual report that the work of the organization, that peace and security are threatened by the evolving nature of conflict, shrinking civic space, mis- and disinformation, hate speech, unregulated cyberspace, the climate emergency, and the rollback of women's rights. The political will has been lacking. Clearly, journalism plays a pivotal role in conflict resolution, safeguarding human rights, and fostering sustainable development. Sadly, journalism is a risky and far too deadly endeavor. Media is consistently attacked and undermined in many contexts. Numerous studies have noted that across the world, female journalists and media professionals encounter escalating online and offline assaults. Gender-based acts of violence encompass stigmatization, misogynistic hate speech, cyberbullying, physical aggression, sexual assault, and tragically, even murder. Strengthening media institutions and media freedoms are essential for the promotion of democracy, to enable the free flow of information, and to protect the interests of society. The United Nations has among its primary objectives one of preventing conflict and promoting international cooperation, and since its founding, it has evolved to take on a wide range of global issues, including the vital role of media. The UN also recognizes the critical role that media plays in conflict resolution, conflict prevention, and peace building. The news media dictates what conflict and conflict aspects get covered, how much airtime or front page news coverage a conflict receives, who speaks about the conflict in media. Do we use the main or auxiliary players in the conflict, aid agencies, terrorists, or the civilians who are impacted? The media can frame a matter in a way that makes it more intractable. Media can act as a weapon of violence, spreading hate and false information. It can also assign and employ stereotypes and give people labels that are dehumanizing. News media, of course, can also provide accurate information in conflict zones, which is critical to help civilians stay safe and to access other necessities. It can also reduce conflict and help aid with resolution by providing accurate information in a timely manner. Also shedding light on the root causes of conflict and provide a path for meaningful dialogue. It can also hold parties to account, expose abuses of power, violations of human rights, crimes of war, and act as a watchdog. The SG, the Secretary General, noted in his annual report, again on the organization, that the UN has created mechanisms in an effort to bolster media development in places of conflict and countries. I won't get into all of those, but they are in his report. The report also highlights the work being done to fight back against the mis- and disinformation, as well as hate speech, and efforts, of course, including monitoring and training. Now, the partnerships play an important role as well, and this includes media, social media companies, and civil society organizations. Now, obviously, the media variables are very complex. News media environments are varied. For example, there are government or quasi-government media monopolies, large media conglomerates, The news values obviously differ at different outlets, as well as to the extent to which governments control the communication through mechanisms such as strict penal codes, legal frameworks that restrict or enable freedoms of press. There's also communication infrastructure that may be limited or advanced and may suffer from war-related or other damage. The interest and motivations of media outlets and journalists, of course, are wide-ranging, and communication methods also differ depending on the country and the region. And the communication technology continues to change the media landscape, and it is challenging, as I'm sure you all know, to manage the volume of information that we're receiving. So, of course, the strategies are also well known. There is, of course, a lack of political will to achieve these, but they include, I think most importantly, protecting press freedom. This includes not only legal protections for the freedom of press, but constitutional guarantees. Journalists and media workers have the right to be protected from harassment and violence and censorship. There needs to be the political will to establish conditions where journalists can carry out their work without retribution. Alongside this, information laws. Political commitments are needed to strengthen the freedom of information to help ensure that government transparency and accountability, and for the process of journalists and citizens and affected persons to request and access things like public documents. These need to be simplified and efficient. Media regulations, obviously this is sort of two-pronged. Independent media regulatory bodies need to have clear mandates that can help ensure fairness as well as accountability in the media industry. And international organizations and other countries and bodies also should encourage and share best practices and resources. Media organizations also need to self-regulate, adhering to ethical codes of conduct. Also, diverse funding and independence. To the degree possible, funding should be diverse, and media outlets should try to reduce their dependence on single revenue streams, as this runs the risk of making them vulnerable to external pressures. Exploring as many funding models as possible, so a combination of philanthropy, subscriptions, memberships, providing grants and other fundings to investigative journalism projects is critical, especially ones that aim to uncover corruption and to hold powerful entities accountable. Media pluralism is also critical. We need to promote a diverse media landscape. To do this, we need to have independent and community-led efforts. Education and media literacy, I think we all know, is becoming increasingly essential. Programs including at schools, teaching members of the public, and engaging civil society. Combating disinformation and fake news. I'm sure your next panel will probably address that as well, along with holding the social media platforms accountable, and public engagement, which I think all of the panelists have noted, it needs to be fostered, and media outlets need to prioritize, among other things, public interest reporting. Strengthening media institutions must be a process that is ongoing, combining a number of things that I named, including the legal as well as regulatory framework. A trustworthy and vibrant media ecosystem is one in which there is both freedom of the press and responsible journalism. To close, as I promised it would be short, in summary, governments, international organizations, civil society must work together to create an environment where media can operate freely, responsibly. Media must be strengthened and protected, and for more specifics about what the UN is doing in specific conflict zones, those are noted in the SDGs annual report, which I'm sure the organization can share with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your contribution and for helping me close this panel with so many wonderful guest speakers, contributors to this conference. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for your participation. A lively audience. I saw many smiles and nodding, and light in your eyes speaks like an image used to a long time ago, 1,000 words. Now I don't know what an image speaks anymore, because it can be, of course, distorted. I would like to end today by reading a short fragment from a book written by a cultural philosopher, published recently at the beginning of the year. I mentioned yesterday during the roundtable his name, Professor Hahn from University of Berlin. Look what he's saying about the future, while he's warning that very soon democracy is gonna be melting into infocracy. The future, says Professor Hahn, is the way in which we react to what is happening, the way in which we transform a movement, a doubt, into truth. So I wish you truthful experiences and maybe truth that lights up your path today and always. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you so much to this wonderful line of expert speakers. Highly appreciate your contributions. So we will soon be back with panel session 2 in a couple minutes as the stage will be changed. So for all our online audience, please remain with us as panel discussion 2 will start shortly. Thank you.